Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to AI for Good. We hope that you, your family, your friends, and your colleagues are all keeping healthy and safe. My name is Fred Werner from the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and it's a privilege to introduce today's session. Now, the ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies, and we're also the organizers of AI for Good, in partnership with 38 UN sister agencies, X Prize Foundation, ACM, and co-convened with Switzerland. And the goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the Sustainable Development Goals and to help scale those solutions for global impact. And today's session is a perfect example of this, where we'll look at how AI can help to accelerate the field of climate science and also one day help to mitigate the effects of climate change. Now, before I introduce today's moderator, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping issues. First of all, your microphone has been disabled, so please use the Q&A and chat function if you wish to communicate. It's the role of a moderator to identify questions and ask those questions to the panelists, and we're counting on your active participation to have a very interactive session. And speaking of being interactive, I have a first challenge for you. Can you please let us know where you're connecting from? Simply use the chat function and make sure it's marked chat to everyone and type in your country, your city, your company, your university, wherever you may be. Here, I'll go first. Geneva, Switzerland. Trinidad, Tobago, Germany, London, Finland, UK, Germany, China, Madrid, Lugano, Slovenia, Finland, Mexico, Dubai. Wow, it's coming in so fast I can't even keep up. But I think we truly have a global audience today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's moderator. His name is Philippe Stier, and he's a professor of atmospheric physics at Oxford University. And he's also the mastermind and the curator of this brand new AI for Good Discovery series on AI and climate science, which of course will help climate change. Philippe, welcome, and the show is all yours.
Great, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Good, I hope you can see my screen now. So welcome everyone for this really exciting kickoff event for our AI for Good Discovery series on accelerating climate science with AI on behalf of the organizing committee. So I have the big honor to introduce this series today, and we have a fantastic set of speakers. So we'll keep the introductions really fairly brief and briefly just motivate the drivers behind putting together this series. So it's no surprise to anyone anymore that climate change is one of the most pressing global challenges we're facing. And human emissions are now also unanimously accepted as a key driver of climate change. So while the science is clearly settled enough to support the urgent call for action, significant uncertainties still remain, in particular regarding to impacts on extreme events and on regional scale. So there's a real urgency to make progress in these areas, as we feel the impacts already today. And I just have one picture here of the recent heat wave in the Pacific Northwest of the US and Canada, where obviously we're very aware of the impacts of climate change on these extreme events already. And we feel those impacts today, but we will certainly feel them even if we're optimistic and can achieve only a warming of 1.5 or 2 degrees. At the same time as climate change is progressing, AI and machine learning have made dramatic breakthroughs. The applications are transforming really entire scientific areas, and new algorithms open the door for applications in really data-intensive areas, such as climate. So this brings us then to the theme of the series. So the identification and quantification of really complex associations between features in vast model and Earth observation data sets are really at the heart of climate science and remain a fundamental problem. And while climate models are skillful and reliable, they still have limitations to represent key processes across a vast range of scales involved. And the challenge is really you have to go from a single cloud droplet all the way to the global scale in a computational model, and that has vast challenges. And interestingly, also only a small fraction of the information content we receive from vast Earth observation data sets that is actually being used to constrain the climate models itself. And that is a big data challenge that is really could benefit from AI and machine learning. So we think it's really time to accelerate climate science with AI. So this Discovery for Good, or this Discovery series, brings together leading voices from academia, industry, and policy. It's meant to provide a forum to ensure that climate science will capitalize on the advances in AI and machine learning. And it will run throughout the year. So this is just a kickoff event, but you can keep following the series and you will see many fascinating expert talks. But kicking off today with the kickoff event, we're really honored to have a set of outstanding speakers. So with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, delivering the opening speech, followed by two expert talks from Valerie Masson-Delmotte, representing the climate science, and Yoshua Bengio, representing AI and machine learning. But now, without further ado, I will hand over to Houlin Zhao, the Secretary General of the United Nations International Telecommunications Unit, who will introduce the next speaker. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip. Distinguished colleagues and friends, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to our discussion today. And I hope that you, your families, and all your loved ones are all in good health and good spirits. So since we have very limited time, I don't want to take too much time to give a lot of introduction information. Let me just begin by expressing my gratitude to our esteemed panelists. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, everyone knows that, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations. Madam Valerie Masson-Delmotte, co-chair of the Working Group 1, the physical science basis of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And Mr. Yoshua Bengio, founder and scientific director of MILA, the Quebec AI Institute. Of course, our moderator, Philip Stier, professor of atmospheric physics and head of atmospheric, oceanic, and planetary physics at Oxford University. I thank you for bringing your unique perspectives to this important discussion. I too highly appreciate your support. Some of the challenges facing humanity are of a scale that demands bold, decisive actions. Advances in AI are delivering new tools to inform this action. We see a perfect embodiment of these descriptions in climate science. We are working together to identify practical applications of AI with the potential to accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are working together to help these applications achieve the scale necessary to global impact. Achieving global impact requires contributions with a global perspective, contributions driven by a diverse collection of expertise. Global impact demands new partnerships. We continue to build these partnerships on the AI for Good platform. Inclusive dialogue helps new partners to understand their respective roles in nurturing emerging fields of innovation. It helps to clarify the contribution expected of all stakeholders, including the contribution expected of ITU. Today's discussions are the first of a new series of AI for Good expert talks on how we could accelerate climate science with AI. And I'm certain that this new series will be influential in clarifying how ITU could best assist you in achieving your ambitions. So with these short remarks, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, my former boss, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the 8th Secretary General of United Nations. I can tell you, after he left the United Nations in 2016, I did not have a chance to see him. I'd like to show this photo to remind my Secretary General, that I did have a very nice photo with you, and it's always kept in my mind. And the Secretary General supported the ITU, supported ICT when he was the Secretary General of the United Nations. And he himself even came to ITU's World Telecom 2009 to give us opening speeches. And we appreciate very much his support. And of course, all those important topics under his leadership set up, including the climate change, including SDGs, moving from MDGs to SDGs, and all those topics continued. And I know that although he left the post of Secretary General of United Nations, a little bit earlier, but over the last few years, he, as he just told me, he was more busy. He had been more busy than he was Secretary General of United Nations. I got some messages that in 2017, Mr.Ban, become the co-chair of the very special group that is Ban Ki-moon's Center for Global Citizens in Vienna, Austria. And in June 2017, Mr. Ban joined the EDAS, a human rights group composed of international statement that was founded by Nelson Mandela. So in November 2018, he became a deputy chair of this group. And 2017, he joined the French President, Mr. Macron, in calling for a global pact for the environment. And in September 2017, he was nominated or elected by the Chinese partners as the chair of international, no, it's not here. That was 2018. 2017, he was elected as chair of International Olympic Committee Ethics Commissions. And then in early 2018, he was elected to lead the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI. And he's serving this post for a 2-year term. And 2018, he was elected as the chairman of the Boao Forum for Asia. And from that position, I could see him from time to time in the Chinese news channel. And for me, he becomes a movie star or television star for the Chinese community. And in 2019, he appointed as the chair of a newly established presidential committee on the national climate on the dust pollution. And in 2020, he was appointed as the official ambassador of the GAMS, World Academy Model United Nations. And I think that he is also chairman of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future, for which I received from time to time the report of this foundation. So I thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to always pay attention to the role of ICT and particularly to support ITU by keeping us informed of those important messages we could hear from him. So, Mr. Ban, the floor is yours. We welcome you to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General Houlin Zhao, Secretary General of the ITU, for your very kind introduction and invitation. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to participate in this very important meeting. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and privilege to speak to you today at this virtual AI and climate change kickoff event. First of all, let me express my special appreciation to Secretary General Houlin Zhao of ITU for inviting me to this timely event. Indeed, this comes at a pivotal moment for us to find innovative solutions for our ongoing fight against the climate change. I take this opportunity to offer my warm congratulations on the realization of this event, which will launch a series of weekly talks by distinguished experts. Eventually, this series will also produce a white paper on open problems on climate science that can be tackled with AI alongside tangible proposals for future-oriented solutions to the pressing climate challenges that we face. And this event truly comes at a significant time for identifying, harnessing, and scaling new solutions to help the international community combat climate change and ensure sustainable development for all. I thank you, distinguished panelists and participants, to AI and climate change kickoff event for your meaningful efforts in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, today we find ourselves at the center of a variety of converging global crises and increased uncertainty. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic continues to upend our economies, societies, and way of life. Climate change is steadily worsening with the superstorms, extreme heat, flooding, fires, and droughts, all expanding in frequency and intensity. Great power tensions and regional conflicts are growing, hindering global cooperation when it is greatly needed. At the same time, new technologies are altering how we communicate, live, and work. Sweeping advances in the fields of AI, biotechnology, and robotics are rapidly changing our countries, cities, and businesses. However, despite these challenges, we have made progress in key areas, and I believe we have invaluable opportunities to change the world for the better. But to do this, we need to work together through a driving commitment to sustainability, innovation, and the power of partnerships and multilateral cooperation. Today, I wish to speak to you about the great importance of coming together in partnership to holistically and urgently address climate change. First, I will underscore the reality of our current climate crisis and our way forward in taking climate action. Second, I will highlight how the use of innovative technology, such as AI, can facilitate our common efforts in forging a brighter future for our planet and humanity. Considering the long-term habitability of our planet and the existential fate of humanity is at stake, we simply must come together, raise our urgency and ambition in addressing the rapidly worsening climate crisis. Climate change is fueling insecurity, conflict, refugee flows, and public health perils around the world. Species are at risk of extinction and ecosystems are collapsing. And these threats do not discriminate. All nations are and will continue to be endangered by them as the world continues to warm. As a result of climate change, rising sea levels are an existential threat to many small island developing states, as well as some of the world's most populous and economically important cities around the world. In recent weeks, much of the Northern Hemisphere has been suffering through an unprecedented heat wave, with hundreds tragically dying in Western Canada and the United States, and temperature in Siberia soaring to 48 degrees Celsius. And densely populated areas of the Middle East and South Asia are now experiencing heat waves so severely that doctors are sounding the alarm about the capacity of humans to physically withstand them in the years ahead. But warming is not just a future threat. A landmark study released in May in the scientific journal, The Nature, says that nearly 37% of all global heat-related deaths can now be blamed on human-caused climate change. How can we mitigate these threats? Western nations such as the European Union, the United States, or the United Kingdom certainly cannot do it alone, nor can Asian countries like China, Korea, and Japan. They cannot do alone. What is needed is an unprecedented global effort propelled by multilateralism, innovation, and global partnership. With this in mind, I am of the view that we must expediently step up our collective efforts to cut global emissions and implement the Paris Climate Change Agreement. During my 10 years serving as the Secretary General of the United Nations, I am proud to have prioritized climate change and elevated its importance to the very top of the international agenda. The Paris Agreement, signed by 195 countries in December 2015, offers us a clear game plan to confront the serious threats to our planet. It sets viable targets to impede rising temperatures, constrict greenhouse gas emissions, and spur climate resilient development and green growth. To faithfully implement the Paris Agreement and push it further, countries need to expand their ambitions and urgency to cut emissions. And we must secure increased climate financing from upper income nations and through the catalyzing power of cooperation and partnerships. This is particularly critical in the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow, United Kingdom, where the climate rulebook will be finalized. In this regard, I commend the growing number of nations for their commitments to reach net zero emissions. Now, global leaders must go further by expanding climate funding for developing countries and scaling up financing for climate adaptation to ensure that COP26 is a great success. Considering that the fate of the health, security, and well-being of our planet and humanity is at stake, we must also come together to harness science, technology, and innovation to help in the fight against climate change, achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and succeed in leaving no one behind. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, over the next 9 years, progress in science, technology, and innovation will be essential in delivering on the global goals from poverty eradication to agriculture and food security to energy, water sanitation, and climate change. Science, technology, and innovation have been steadily transforming our world in recent years, and we are currently in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution as new advancement transform our way of living, thinking, and working. Digital technologies, robotics, AI, biotechnology, nanotechnology, all have fundamental and far-reaching impacts and both present opportunities and challenges. AI especially holds a great promise for our planet Earth. This is particularly timely as the scientific evidence underpinning the attribution of global warming to human activity is frankly undisputable, and new solutions are increasingly needed. However, significant uncertainties remain, both in our understanding of climate sensitivity and in particular of the impacts of climate change on regional scales that can be expected even under 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming. With this in mind, the availability of unprecedented amounts of climate data sets from each observations and the climate models provide opportunities, but also huge challenges as current methodologies are simply not equipped to extract the full information content at scale. At the same time, artificial intelligence, and in particular, machine learning, ML, is transforming many aspects of society, including transportation, commerce, and security. These exciting transformations are built on algorithms that learn features and patterns, the huge volumes of data now available in these sectors. In turn, these algorithms have developed at a rapid pace, allowing improved accuracy and robust uncertainty quantification, while simultaneously respecting prescribed scientific constraints. For many years, climate scientists have used comparatively simple statistical approaches to try and discern subtle changes in observational data sets or to interpret abundant climate model data output. The opportunity now presents itself for climate science to exploit advances in machine learning to answer some of the most pressing challenges of our time, while they are still relevant for policymakers and in support of the urgent efforts needed to address the climate crisis. This acceleration will be built upon supervised and unsupervised learning of features and patterns in the vast amounts of Earth observation and climate model data that is now available, transforming our ways to constrain climate models and the detection of climate change. It will also be built upon robust emulation of existing climate models and their components and causal detection and attribution of regional climate changes. Climate scientists have begun to enthusiastically explore these possibilities, but scaling such novel approaches to the exabytes of data, which will be created over the next decade to answer urgent scientific and policy relevant questions in a timely manner, will require concerted collaboration between policymakers, academia, and the private sector, and many others. Considering this, let us recall that SDG 17, Global Partnership, highlights the prominent role that dynamic partnerships should play to help achieve the global goals. In particular, industrial partners can play a leading role in bringing in their extensive expertise and know-how. They can also help in ensuring that climate data is accessible and interoperable with the latest machine learning algorithm and the specialized computational hardware that is required to run them. Under this backdrop, this impressive series provides a timely forum for leading voices in this field across sectors to outline a vision for how we will achieve this with the aim of accelerating climate science with AI. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm of the view that science, technology, and innovation cannot be confined solely to the use of new technologies or software. Indeed, innovation is both a mindset and attitude. It means questioning assumptions, rethinking established systems and procedures, and introducing new strategies. New technologies such as AI are important, but as a means to an end. This was the message I emphasized to the global community of scientists and innovators in 2016, when, as UN Secretary General, I presided over the first multi-stakeholder forum on science, technology, and innovation for the SDGs. In this connection, I'd like to reiterate this message to you as this exciting AI and climate change series continues forward following today's kickoff event. The fact of the matter is that we will need the ownership, participation, and active involvement from all sectors of society to limit emissions and implement the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and for sustainable development to become a global reality within the next 9 years. And in this era of division and uncertainties, I strongly believe that fighting climate change and achieving the UN's SDGs are two efforts that simply must unite the world through cooperation and partnership. Quite plainly, our collective existence moving forward depends on it. But this urgent and historic undertaking can create opportunities as well. We can create new opportunities for social inclusion, for the cultivation of essential partnerships, for economic growth, for gender equality, and for the greater good. I'm confident that science and technology will be central to these unified efforts. We can use AI to better humanity. We must remember that global cooperation, ignited by dynamic innovation and coupled with forward-thinking policymaking, is essential for achieving the global goals. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. I know that we can achieve this. There is simply no other option. With your active engagement and ideas, we can and will continue to flourish and be sustainable for our children, their children, and more generations to come. This is our moral and political responsibilities to make our humanity and planet Earth live sustainably together. I thank you for your attention and active effort to this end. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much, Secretary General. Thank you. I think that Philip may have questions to raise to our Secretary General. I know that the Secretary General will leave very soon. So I will just take this opportunity to add one more sentence.
Yes.
That Secretary General highlighted, he strongly believes that climate change and SDGs are very important projects, not only under his leadership we created this one, but it's very important for our future. I would like to add another point, because the climate change and SDGs are well known everywhere. There's another topic not that much recognized, that the WSIS process. And the WSIS process was, held, started by first phase held in Geneva 2003, and then second phase finished in November in Tunisia in 2005. Then starting from 2006, we tried to have follow-up actions. And then during that 10 years, from 2006 to 2016, that there's still always some kind of argument whether we should continue to push with this or not. But the Secretary General gave us a very clear support that his support with this to continue. Just imagine if we don't have with this process where we are today, the ICT will not be developed so well in the world today. And although still have population not beneficial from with this, from the ICT development, but again, with this connectivity, with application of new technologies, and including the AI, 5G, now under the COVID-19, we see a lot of benefit from this one. But we take this as granted, as water and air. But if we don't have that kind of effort we made, and Secretary General's effort to support us to continue this, and particularly in December 2015, we had another UN conference, General Assembly, to review the WSIS process, and Mr.Ban also support us to continue this process for another 10 years. So I take this opportunity also to like to recognize the Secretary General's unique and forgettable efforts to help the whole world to have this ICT development. Now, I know that, Philip, you have a lot of questions, and the Secretary General did that. Now, I give back the floor to you. Thank you.
Okay, in a very brief way, everybody will agree that the Sustainable Development Goals are the most ambitious and far-reaching visions the United Nations has ever presented in its history. And there were many such visions presented, including MDG. But SDG include even climate change among 17 goals. There is a number 13 goal is climate change. So all development aspect and climate and scientific aspect are all together in this. In that regard, I am proud to tell to everybody that this is the vision, most ambitious and far-reaching vision the UN has ever presented to the humanity, to the world. Therefore, we must implement this by the end of 2030. Particularly when it comes to climate, there is no time to lose. The climate change is approaching much faster than we have anticipated. Now it is coming to us in daily life. Let's look at the case of COVID-19. COVID-19 is not an independent aspect of this. It is two sides of one coin, because we have neglected our duties to care our nature. The nature is now responding very seriously with a very clear warning. Then that's why I'm saying that COVID-19 and climate change and sustainable development, they're just the two sides of one coin. Had we cared our ecosystems, I think we would not suffer from this one, because we neglected and we degraded our ecosystems. Then there is no way all these animals are coming closer to human being. That is one hard lesson we have to learn at this time. Now, what needs to be done? The recent G7 summit, they met and reaffirmed their strong commitment that they will provide the science and technology and $100 billion financial support, etc. But unfortunately, they have not laid out any plan roadmap in detail. They should really have presented it. Now, this is the first year of implementing climate change agreement. First year. Then we make sure that carbon neutrality by 2050 must be implemented. In that regard, China has announced by 2060. So we really appreciate, and most of the European Union, Korea, Japan, United States, and there are at least 120 countries who are in line to declare, but there are very few countries who have actually declared and tried to make it legal obligations in their own countries. We must make sure that carbon neutrality must be realized by 2050. Otherwise, we have no hope. And ITU is very important part. You have to utilize all available technological, scientific tools, the AI, all these are fast approaching. It can be a very effective tools for us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I know I'm aware you also have to leave soon, so I'll just ask one very quick question. And so we're aiming here really to bring players across very different sectors together. And as part of this series, we really want to gain momentum in this field. So from your tremendous experience, could you give us some advice how to translate some momentum from something like a series of events like this into actual actions and progress?
Now, there is now a clear commitment on how to achieve this one. We must hold this momentum and implement into action. For that, what I'm emphasizing is the global partnership supported by political will, by the political leaders, I know that the politicians do not enjoy much respect everywhere around the world. But in any way, we need their political leadership, their political will. Then I think we can make it. And they can make global partnership much stronger and organized way. Now, government, business community, and civil society, these are tripartite partners which they have to work together. When you have just two pillars, it's unstable. When you have three tripartite pillars, these can stand much solid way. Therefore, there is a clearly very important role by the business communities, because it is the business communities who invest for science and technology. It is they who really mobilize and utilize the science and technology in their daily operations. Therefore, we need more engagement by the business communities, and on top of this, we need have a clear political will. In that regard, COP26 will be the place where political leaders, business communities, and civil societies will all gather. We must not let this opportunity slip away. So I'm really hoping that everybody must be united. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights today and for your time. Thank you very much, and for staying up late in Korea.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. So we will now move on, and it's my real great pleasure to introduce Valerie Masson-Delmotte. Valerie is a climate scientist and a research director in the French Climate and Environment Sciences Laboratory, LSCU. And she's an expert on paleoclimate and uses data from past climates to test models of climate change. But she also currently serves as co-chair of the Working Group 1 of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, which represents a physical science basis. And that she's been very busy finalizing its 6th assessment report, due to appear shortly. So we're really lucky to have Valerie here today, and we may also get some glimpse into some of the AR6 findings already. So Valerie, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Philip, and dear distinguished organizers and participants. Thanks for this invitation to join this stimulating session on accelerating climate science with artificial intelligence. We're currently at around 1.1 degrees Celsius of global warming, resulting from human influence and with growing impacts in every region, over land and in the ocean. The concentration of heat trapping carbon dioxide and methane continues to increase unabated in the atmosphere due to emissions from human activities. In 2018, the special report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius has highlighted that every fraction of additional warming matters in terms of climate-related impacts and risks, affecting critical aspects such as food, water, habitat security, and the preservation of ocean and land ecosystems. It has shown that limiting global warming requires to reach net zero CO2 emissions due to the close relationship between cumulative past, present, and future CO2 emissions and global surface temperature change, together with reducing the net effect from other drivers, in particular methane. As you know, I'm currently in the final run of a 3-year marathon with 230 scientists from 60 countries to synthesize the best available climate science in the 6th assessment report on the physical science basis of climate change for the IPCC. For the first time, our approval session focused on the summary for policymakers with delegates from all countries will take place virtually in the last week of July and the first week of August. As the release of the report is scheduled on August 9th, I cannot yet share with you the key findings. So I will now reflect on the ever-growing scientific evidence and avenues and opportunities for science advances for which artificial intelligence can be critical. There's an ever-growing body of scientific data from multiple lines of evidence. And these lines of evidence include insights from past climates, in situ observations, and remote sensing. It's really vital to continue and preserve the observational capacities, including the frequencies used to monitor the atmosphere. The lines of evidence also include outputs of global and regional climate models with increasing spatial resolution and advances in the representation of physical, chemical, and some biological processes, leading to growing complexity. Large ensembles of climate simulations are available in response to paleoclimate, historical forcing, and scenarios exploring a broad range of future greenhouse gas emissions and land use changes. New approaches are being developed to identify relationships between an observable quantity and characteristics of the response of some aspects of the climate system in the future, in order to constrain future responses. There's a huge potential to use artificial intelligence methods in this direction and strengthen the use of multiple lines of evidence to narrow the uncertainty on future change. Long-term information is critical to detect the emergence of human-induced climate change signals from background natural climate variability. It is particularly important to have a long-term context for work on rare extreme events. There is a massive amount of historical information that exists, but sometimes is not available or not yet digitalized. And there is an urgent need to accelerate data rescue using cutting-edge approaches, which can include citizen participatory science. I would like now to move into the atmosphere, and clouds play a key role in the response of the climate system to perturbations of the Earth's energy balance, and they also play a key role in the atmospheric water cycle and surface climate. Critical science advances are needed to transfer insights from observations, cloud resolving and convection permitting models, which are very time-consuming and are usually run on small scales and for short durations, to advance the representation of cloud and subgrid processes in global and regional climate models. The Working Group 1 report will reflect major recent advances, allowing to narrow the range of climate sensitivity, a key metric quantifying the response of global surface temperature to increased CO2 concentration. Further progress is possible regarding cloud feedbacks, convective cloud aerosol interactions, with implications for both the global climate response, the regional climate evolutions, and the regional water cycle implications. Regarding the water cycle, advances can also be made in the representation of land and water management in regional and global climate models, building on multiple sources of data with the need to be able to update this as quickly as changes occur in the real world. In order to better inform choices that maximize benefits in terms of climate and air quality, there can be an emphasis on short-lived climate forces, for which there's an urgent need for improved spatialized inventories. This is particularly critical to achieve at high resolution for urban areas and for informal aspects in developing countries. This could as well benefit from innovative technologies to combine multiple sources of open city data across sectors and also rely on low-cost sensors. I would like to flag that scientific knowledge related to cities and climate change science will be the focus of the next IPCC special report after 2023. A number of focused recommendations in that matter had been developed in the Research and Action Agenda for Cities and Climate Change from a very broad Cities IPCC conference in 2018. Let's now move to land. The IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land in 2019 has stressed the potential of sustainable land management for climate action, for adaptation, for mitigation, and for food security. In addition to the improved monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions and emission inventories, it is critical to strengthen the ability to monitor carbon stores and fluxes in forests, soils, wetlands, permafrost regions, and to better account again for land management, including forestry, land use and land use change. I know that we put here an emphasis on climate science, but there's a very strong interface between climate and biodiversity. The recent IPCC IPBES workshop has highlighted the joint benefits for climate and biodiversity of stopping the loss and degradation of carbon and species-rich ecosystems, of restoring them, and increasing sustainable agriculture and forestry practices. Innovative tools are needed to monitor related action and to better inform emission inventories and the understanding of associated feedbacks. I'm now turning to the ocean and cryosphere, which include slow components of the climate system. The IPCC Special Report on the Ocean and Cryosphere from 2019 has shown that human-induced climate change already has a major footprint on systems we depend upon, from glaciers in the high mountains to the depths of the ocean, and with changes expected to continue on timescales of centuries or more. Science advances can narrow uncertainties associated with glacier inventories and their response in the coming decades, with major implications for local and downstream effects. Thinking of sea level, which is critical for coasts worldwide, the main uncertainty on sea level rise on a timescale of century and more arises from deep uncertainty associated with the Southern Ocean, sea ice, Antarctic ice shelves, and ice sheet processes. We face multiple challenges related to observations in remote and harsh environments, process understanding, and modeling at sufficient resolution to resolve coastal and shallow water processes. The ocean and cryosphere teach us from paleoclimate evidence that there are nonlinear responses associated with these components of the climate system. There are still too few systematic studies focusing on abrupt change, thresholds for responses and tipping points that bring together multiple lines of evidence and provide constraints informed by theoretical and process-based understanding. This is really an area where major advances are needed. There's also a strong potential to advance the availability of robust climate information at regional scales for impact and risk assessment, and of course to inform regional and local adaptation strategies. In the recent years, climate services have advanced the distillation of climate information through innovative co-production processes involving users, stakeholders, and producers of climate information, taking into account the specificities of each context and the user needs. Robust regional climate information can be built from observations, the attribution of observed changes to drivers, the theoretical understanding of the processes, the drivers, and the feedbacks at play for each region, combining that with global and regional climate projections. Advances will be possible with the availability and improved regional observations, advances in downscaling methods that account for process-based understanding, this is critical, and also an improved representation of urban and land use aspects in the models that we use. Innovative methodologies are also needed on another part, which is how to evaluate the quality of local and regional climate information that is used to inform decision-making or to perform climate stress tests. And we should make use of innovative methodologies to propagate best practices and the best available knowledge as soon as possible. In every region, we are currently experiencing the multiple aspects of a changing climate, with gradual changes such as warming, changes in growing seasons, shrinking glaciers and sea level rise, as well as more frequent, more intense extremes such as heat waves, heavy rainfall events, droughts with compound effects affecting flooding or fire weather. The multiple characteristics of our changing climate are interacting with local exposure, vulnerability, and local responses. Developing coordinated initiatives to record and map the observed impacts and responses is also critical to advance the understanding of the characteristics of a changing climate that drive impacts, to better identify tolerance thresholds and develop indices that are relevant to provide actionable information to society. This also includes progress in how human influence has affected what is already observed, and understand how these characteristics will change in the coming decades so that science can inform action to reduce and manage risks, including early warning systems and response and adaptation strategies. There's a major gap in many regions of the world, and coordinating initiatives could help fill in these specific regional gaps. Innovative approaches are needed to design and implement such internationally coordinated initiatives. New technologies can help build on local knowledge through citizen science and participatory approaches. They can help enhance the relevance of climate science and make robust scientific analysis and information broadly accessible. Let me now go back to the forthcoming Working Group 1 report. In this report, we have implemented best practices in traceability and reproducibility, including the adoption of the FAIR principles for scientific data management and stewardship for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data and metadata. Each of the report chapter has a data table documenting the input data and the code used to generate figures and tables, with a subset of data and code freely available. These principles are also central to a novel aspect, an interactive atlas, which is an online tool providing flexible spatial and temporal analysis of past, observed, and projected climate change information. I really hope that these efforts will facilitate further use of these data, as well as making climate information more accessible to everyone in the sense of science for citizens. And this could also be used to develop context-relevant, interactive resources, user-friendly resources for teaching and for enhancing climate literacy. I hope that I have triggered your enthusiasm and curiosity for the forthcoming report. I have a last suggestion. The scientists involved in this report have developed a rigorous, exhaustive, objective and robust assessment of the state of knowledge based on the critical analysis of evidence from 14,000 scientific publications. And they have received more than 75 review comments from other scientists and experts. This process is currently extremely time-consuming for volunteer scientists, and it relies on very basic methods. It's very, very simple what is used at the moment. With more than 40,000 peer-reviewed publications per year with the keyword climate change, I'm certain that artificial intelligence techniques could, for the next IPCC assessments, better support the work of authors, for instance by facilitating systematic literature reviews, the accessibility of data referred to in the assessed publications, and also the use of literature in multiple languages. I think that there's a potential for your group to better work with the IPCC to improve the working conditions for the next assessment cycles. To finish, recent reports have flagged how much every fraction of warming matters, every year matters in terms of climate action, and every choice matters. From your expertise, from what you can bring on board, your choices can contribute to accelerating climate science advances and sharing climate science to better inform societal choices towards sustainability and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such a comprehensive and really inspiring talk, because you pointed out so many linkages between the fundamental climate sciences and the potential of machine learning and AI to help out. I particularly also like the idea with the literature search. We all face a struggle with the amount of literature we actually have to digest. We will take questions at the end, but now we'll go straight to introducing Yoshua Bengio. So Yoshua is one of the world's leading experts in artificial intelligence and a pioneer in deep learning. He's a professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Montreal, and also the founder and scientific director of MILA, the Quebec Institute of Artificial Intelligence. He's received many honors. Among one of them is the Turing Award in 2019, which is often compared to the Nobel Prize of Computing. But Yoshua is also one of the machine learning experts who have already deeply engaged with the topic of climate science and thought about the problem. So it's very exciting to have him here today. And I'm quite excited to learn more about this work in his talk. So over to you, Yoshua.
Thank you, Philip. Let me try to share my screen here. So I won't have the time to do justice to all of the things I would like to share about the subject of AI and fighting climate change, but I'll try to give you some highlights of things that I've been thinking about or working on, and people have been involved in who try to use their expertise to deal with this very, very important threat. One thing, I mean, people ask, is there like one thing that AI could be used for to help us with climate change? And the answer is there are many things, and unfortunately, it's not like there's like one killer app for AI here. But on the other hand, there's a large community of people who want to help and are working on different aspects, from optimizing energy resources, smart grids, demand forecasting, minimizing transportation costs, climate modeling, of course, that we've been talking about, and I'll say a few more words, the discovery of new materials, also I'll mention, conservation efforts. And one thing that's a little bit original that we've been involved with as well is helping people better understand the change that is coming in a more versatile way than what has been possible up to now, using visualizations from AI. I participated in this really large overview study that's called Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, with about 22 authors. And that tries to answer the question of like, what are the current ways or appealing, forthcoming ways that AI can be helpful in this battle. We have set up a website called climatechange.ai that I encourage you to visit, where there's, of course, the paper, but a lot more material, and trying to organize the community on the AI side to connect better with the various domain experts outside of AI that we have to talk to. This is a very multidisciplinary effort. You'll find in particular this grid that covers many of the approaches in the paper, where on one axis you have areas of applications of AI in the context of fighting climate change, like electricity systems, transportation, buildings, industry, farms, CO2 removal, climate protection, and so on. And then on the horizontal axis, you have different areas of machine learning, from computer vision, natural language, time series, and so on. So I want, in the same spirit, I'm part of a committee that was created by the Global Partnership on AI. I'm a co-chair of the Responsible AI Working Group for this GPI, the Global Partnership on AI, and we have created a committee on the climate and biodiversity, headed by Nicola Miai and Rajesh Shatila. And our objective is to help identify areas of investment in AI to help decision makers invest, because I think one of the big problems we have right now is that until carbon pricing is high enough, there's not enough incentive from industry to do the required innovation, in particular, in AI, but in other areas. So this is something we're trying to prepare an actionable roadmap for the COP26 to help the Stier efforts towards contributing to the Paris Accord and the preservation of biodiversity. Now, let me go slightly more technical, but still very high level. One of the areas that I'm invested in is the synthesis of new materials using machine learning, either for batteries or carbon capture or potentially other applications. And this is something that involves two aspects that I'll mention. One is about the modeling, and the modeling aspect has interesting connections to climate modeling. And the other is about the search, like in the space of materials, how do you find good solutions to particular problems we're trying to solve? From a machine learning perspective, the way this looks like is the following. You have the real world, maybe like experimental assays, or it might be a simulator that's very expensive that you can't run that often. And in the middle, we have what we call a world model. So that's what we typically would involve machine learning or physical models or a combination of both. And we would do experiments in the real world, collect data, and use that to train the world model. But now the part where more original machine learning is involved that I'm very excited about is what we call generative models that can be used to help figure out what experiments to do next. So in that search, for example, in the space of materials, which is a very, very high dimensional space, there's an exploration problem, and we're using generative models and reinforcement learning in order to guess good configurations based on the data that has been acquired already. So on the modeling side, there are lots of interesting pieces of work going on where you can combine knowledge from physics or climate science or chemistry, depending on the application, with machine learning. The obvious application, and there's already quite a bit of work, is to use machine learning approaches as a black box to approximate an existing physical model so that we can run, say, the dynamics faster and enable greater space-time resolution, but also potentially look at the stochastic aspects. So, for example, I've been involved in modeling cloud dynamics using these kinds of approaches. Something that's more recently been investigated, I think is quite important, is how to incorporate in the same model both physical knowledge and learned aspects, so kind of hybrid models. For example, incorporating constraints as physical invariance or equivariances in machine learning dynamics models. And finally, one thing that gets me very excited is, and maybe a little bit more towards the future is how we could use current state-of-the-art research in deep learning, in particular involving causality, to help us discover new abstractions, new aggregate variables that are such that when you run dynamics with these variables, in addition to the ones that physicists already know about, you can do a good job of capturing dynamics, even though you might do it at some lower spatial and temporal resolution. Now, let me talk a little bit about another topic which concerns me a lot. It's the question of why is it that governments are not acting sufficiently in spite of many, many years, if not decades of warnings. And there are probably a lot of potential explanations for this, but one of the factors we've been thinking about, as well as many others, is the human aspects of this, the psychological factors, the fact that we as humans have cognitive biases that somehow make many of us underestimate the threat of climate change. And so this has been studied quite a bit, out of sight, out of mind. These notions or the catastrophes that are happening, they're often far away in time for most people and in space and abstract. And so it's hard for these warnings to compete with short-term economic issues and fears about interventions by governments that could really steer us on the right track. So one of the efforts I want to mention is based on the same kind of generative models that I mentioned earlier that allow to sample from a distribution. We can transform a distribution. So we can take images, for example, of the Eiffel Tower and transform it into one where it gets flooded. Or we can take images of houses and transform them in images where there would be fires around them or fog. And the goal of this is to bring climate change closer, making it more tangible and more personal, to help people better integrate what is coming to us. So as an example, if you take an image like the ones on the left with the green grass, you can apply the pipeline of machine learning techniques we have developed using these generative models to transform the image into one where the house would be potentially flooded. So it took quite a bit of effort, and we're preparing a website where people will be able to enter an address and see these transformations. This is an example of something that was synthesized using these methodologies. From real pictures, and then here's another one more inside a city, and this one is illustrating where it's not just a flood, but we can do things like fogs or these images where like what happened with the fires in California and Australia, the sky changes its color in the way you see here. The last thing I want to talk about is it was motivated by discussions and sort of thinking about relationships between machine learning, multi-agent machine learning, and economics, and by the problem I just mentioned of cognitive biases. So why is it that governments are not taking the hard decisions that they should be taking? And in good part, it's also because the people, the majority of people don't put enough priority on this issue. So one thing I was thinking about is even if governments might not have the guts to put, say, carbon price high enough right now, what they could do is defer that increase in prices to later governments, but not just about the price of carbon emitted in the future, but for carbon emitted today, right? So the idea is to defer to later governments to decide what the price should have been today. And I'll explain how this could be done, but the idea is that future governments will have more information, catastrophes will have occurred, people will be more sensitized to the issues. And of course, science will show much more certainty about the different things that could happen to us. Now, of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but I think almost anybody rational today, if they had to make a bet about what governments in 20 years will would give as a price for carbon, it would be much higher than today. And so we want to use that in order to come up with a scheme that makes polluters pay an assigned budget today for what future governments think should be done. So imagine that, say, a government creates a new law that, starting in 2022, allows future governments after 2022 to retroactively apply their future carbon price to the emissions from 2022 onward. So maybe in 2022, the government sets a price, let's say $70. And then in 2023, the government increases it by $10. So now the idea is that the companies, the polluters, which emitted, say, a ton of carbon in 2022, when 2023 arrives and the price has increased by $10, they will owe $10 extra for their 2022 pollution. Of course, in reverse, if the price had gone down, which is very unlikely, let's say by $10 again, the government would give them a rebate for what they had paid earlier. So that's the core of the idea, and I'll try to go a little bit more in detail. But what this would do is, if you think about it, it would force companies to set aside a budget for how much they will owe governments in the future for the carbon they emit today. And in addition, if you wanted to rationally set aside that budget, you would have to take into account not just the expected forecasts of climate change and how governments might price carbon in a societally appropriate way, but also the cost for uncertainty. As we know, there could be really much more catastrophic events than the expected trajectory that our current climate models give us. And if from an economic perspective, you have to account for these possibilities, which also mean the price of carbon would be much higher as we approach these bad scenarios. So companies usually don't like to have uncertainty about their costs coming from in the future. So one option, which I think would make a lot of sense, is that they could buy an insurance. In fact, what we really need here is an insurance system for the bad things that can happen in the future. So insurance companies could sell these polluters a fixed price premium. So they pay a fixed price today. And of course, the insurance companies would then be paying future governments for these changes in prices. But also the insurance companies would have to incorporate in their price the cost of uncertainty, just like they do for any uncertain events that you get insurance for. So this uncertainty aspect is quite important because the uncertainty about future trajectories of the climate are highly asymmetric. Okay? And, if things go really well, maybe it's not so bad, but they can also go really bad, and the cost of society would be huge, and that would come down in the price. Finally, these insurance companies, they would have to compete with each other, or maybe these insurance contracts would be market traded. And so there would be an incentive for them to be really honest, to be rational in that forecast. Otherwise, other insurance companies would buy their contracts or sell, at a better price. So the idea is really to force the economic system into a setting where the actors have to take a rational decision about the price of carbon. And finally, I just want to mention that if we use something like carbon pricing, we have to think about how that money should be used. It should be used to compensate the underprivileged who are going to be unfairly hit by climate change or by the increases in the cost of living due to mitigation and carbon pricing, reskill workers losing their jobs, and invest in R&D and technology to accelerate transition because companies are not doing it fast enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoshua, fascinating overview of all the different areas. You've obviously given this quite a lot of thought already. Fantastic. I know you're on a tight schedule because you have to give a talk at the full hour. So we'll give you a question to start with, and read out a question from In Kyung Choi. Which area do you see ML and AI can contribute the most at the moment? Perhaps the low-hanging fruits. Is it more global regional climate modeling, analysis of the effects on society, prediction for different mitigation strategies? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I don't think there's unfortunately, there's not one area. But the good news is that there's now a lot of interest in the machine learning community to get involved in this kind of work. We have now been having workshops at the main conferences for a couple of years, like 2 or 3 times a year. And hopefully, this will expand into new journals at the intersection of machine learning and climate and fighting climate. Yeah, I mean, of course, each of us has to make choices. And as you've seen in my presentation, there are particular directions that I've been involved in. And I would like to push forward. There are others I didn't mention, like, one of the strengths of the advances in machine learning has everything having to do with images, right? So spatial models, satellite images. There's already been quite a bit of work, and I think that that's a kind of low-hanging fruit, if you're asking me.
Great. Maybe just one very particular question that is posed by Regina Valiolina, and what kind of AI solutions exist, for example, to trace plastics in the oceans and other bits? What are the practical solutions for some of these questions?
I don't know about this particular question, but I've been involved in a project where we were looking at plastic pollution in rivers, and I guess the same kind of thing could be used in the ocean, but I'm not the really sufficient expert on this. And basically, it's computer vision. So the problem is collecting data where people will have labeled images that contain plastic. And then the technology for this is basically like a black box. You don't need to be a big expert to use these things. So it's much more about the logistics of collecting the data. Training models for these things is a very standard thing. And then it's more about deployment and, talking with the people who can do this at scale. I mean, a lot of the issues in applying machine learning are not really in the technical aspects of machine learning, especially in computer vision areas. I mean, it's much more about how you deploy and how you work with the experts, how you work with in the particular field, like who are going to who know the particular problems and how to finance these things, and how to get governments involved to fund things that may not be commercially interesting but are really societally important. So unfortunately, these are the kinds of questions that are on our path to really have an impact.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I know also Valerie is on a tight schedule. Everyone is. So Valerie, you already looked at questions I saw online. Do you want to pick your questions, some questions you want to address directly?
Yes, there was a question about girls and women in AI and also climate science. And on that aspect, I think that there are a couple of approaches that have proved useful. Mentorship, including at early ages and in the start of studies. Role models, early age initiatives that come with prizes that can trigger motivation and emulation for going into these fields. I really think it's critical to work on that aspect of gender equality, because it's a lost opportunity if we don't get all the bright minds on board. So that's the first one. And the other question was from Ted Shepard about my emphasis on participatory and citizen science. First of all, I think there's untapped information where we can have access to more detailed spatial information, almost in real time. There have been examples for mapping flooding and enhancing early warning systems that have been impressive, but only on the short term, and having more information on the longer term is really important. Also in the context where in some countries, some data, for instance, in the hands of insurance companies is not public. So it could allow overcoming that. And another aspect which I think is critical is building trust and therefore creating a common ownership between scientists and local communities, for instance. This is also has been highlighted by Yoshua, that there are a number of obstacles in the way people have ownership of climate science and climate information. Having spaces where citizens can contribute with scientists can help overcome some of these barriers. And there was also one question about mindsets, and I want to place an emphasis here on climate literacy, education, training. That's critical. Yoshua, you have given a nice example of conveying climate information on a location. But I think another aspect that might benefit from innovative methods is travel in time. Travel in time, go back in the past and today and see the changes that have already occurred, and then travel in the future, put yourself in the foots of your kids and how the world could be and how it could be if you implement change now. I think these dimensions of traveling in time can be very powerful, and there are governance initiatives implemented, for instance, in some cities in Japan, to project oneself in the future to better inform decision-making for long-term implications.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Valerie. I saw Joshua had already to run because he's giving a talk at the full hour and he probably needs a breather in between. But thank you so much, Valerie, for a fascinating talk, insights into the workings of IPCC, but then also for addressing these questions so well. So before everyone else runs now, I'll pass on to Duncan, who will talk us through what happens next as part of this event series.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, I hope you all agree that this has been a wonderful event, but it's just the start. So starting next week and then continuing after a short summer break every Wednesday from September through to around the end of the year, we're going to have the opportunity to take a deeper dive into some of the many ways that AI can accelerate climate science, and in some cases already is. So we have a fantastic schedule of confirmed speakers, and many more still to come. At the end of this, we work together to produce a white paper proposing ways to ensure that these efforts lead to the acceleration of climate science that we feel is needed to match the urgency of the problem. So we will kick off this series next week, so mark your diaries. We have Professor Tapio Schneider from Caltech, who will be talking about AI accelerated climate modeling. So that's on Friday, the 16th of July, 4 p.m. Geneva time, and we very much look forward to that. The link to register should be popping up in the chat just shortly. So we look forward to seeing many of you there, hopefully.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Duncan. So what's left is really just to thank everyone for attending, to thank all the speakers again for really fascinating talks. And we hope to see you weekly throughout the rest of the year, potentially even beyond. So there's a lot of interest and we will keep the momentum going. So I'll pass back to Fred now.
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Duncan. And thank you to our distinguished speakers and panelists. And also thank you to you, the audience, for all of your great questions. They're still popping up as we speak. And that's something we'll have to digest. But the good news is, like Duncan said, this is part one of a series that will be going throughout the rest of the year. And I do believe this is just the beginning. So before I close with some announcements, I'd like to ask my colleague if we could quickly put up a poll. It's just a quick satisfaction poll to let us know how you felt about this session and if you would recommend it to a friend or a colleague or not. And while we're doing that, answering the survey, I'd like to highlight a few upcoming sessions. So we have 2 machine learning 5G challenge sessions on the 9th of July and the 12th of July. So if you're interested in learning how to solve machine learning puzzles in 5G networks, this could be just for you. As Duncan said, we also have part 2 of this AI and climate science session coming up. So AI and accelerated climate modeling by Professor Tapio Schneider from Caltech. So that's on July 16th. And we have a double header that day. On the same day, we also have a discovery session, but on AI and health. And probably one of the better titles I've heard for the AI for Good programming. It's Making Neural Networks Uncool Again by Jeremy Howard, and he's the founder of Fast AI. So just to reiterate, that is at 9 a.m. on July 16th, and at 4 p.m. we have the client science session that Duncan was highlighting. And with that, I'd just like to thank you everyone again, and wish you all a nice summer, and signing off, and we'll be back for more quite soon. So thank you and goodbye.
Rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector. Rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector. Selector, rewind selector, rewind selector. Rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector.